Hi, welcome to another episode of Groundwork, where I interview the leaders building the most interesting ecosystem and partnership businesses in the world. And today I'm really excited to have Alex with me here. Alex has got an awesome background working in a ton of great technology companies, building partnership programs, and also now working on the other side of the coin as well. And so I'm very excited to dig into his experience. So, Alex, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate you having me here. Good to be here. And yes, my journey in partnerships, I think, is very like many of us. It started not in partnerships. I've been a sales guy, all in commission versus draw, carrying the bag in all sorts of type of positions, from selling something for $100 a month to dealing with mega deals for a good half of my professional career. From 2008 through 2017, I was all I knew was how to sell, direct sales in all sorts of positions. And then at 2017 at Outreach, and we can talk a little bit more about that, I've really found my calling by doing a lot of strategies within the company. And I said, this is it. Sales always felt transactional to me, even relationship driven positions. But when I stepped into partnerships, it really felt like it was me building something that was greater than me. It worked with I work with my partners, I work with my customers, internal, external. But really, even through that role that I started back in outreach, is when I found my passion for building something goes beyond itself. And so, since outreach, I've built partnerships from 0 to 1. I've been part of companies where I've led relationship with GSIs and agencies. I work in go-to-market teams where we kind of collaborated between direct sales teams and channel partners. And today, kind of in the full circle, I am working for an agency that was my fun story. My very first partner referral agreement actually was with Curtis Robb here at Outbound Funnel. So in the full circle, I've joined his agency about a year and a half ago, and I'm a CRO for this firm today.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'd love to start there because I imagine you are now on the other side of the coin, as we talked about, where you've been a partnerships person working in a technology company who partners with agencies and implementers and service providers. And now you are a service provider who I expect is partnering with tech companies based on the industry you're in. And so tell me a little bit about that. Like what? Just let's start at the most, like the 30,000. Like what's the difference?
Yeah, I love that. And just for context, I've worked with hundreds of agencies in my past life, from independent consultants who were working as Army of One to PwCs of the world. And arguably, right now, I'm an agency. We're about uh, 20 people or so, right? Some full time, some contractors. But there's a couple of things that as a person who wrote programs for agencies on a vendor side, right? And I work, just for context again, I work for Outreach on 24 Pilot, and I work so basically a vendor, a software as a service providers. Uh, I've I've always treated my agency partners as my partners, as people who became an extension of my professional services, as a good right arm of sales for my account executive, account managers, and really a really strong support for our customer success teams. That's how I look at my agency in the past. When I stepped into this role, and number one, in an agency, your title, very few times your title really represents what you do. There's definitely functions where you're responsible for what it is, but it is a very broad amount of responsibilities that everybody in the firm has to take on. And working with partners, um, I didn't realize how important capacity planning is for us, right? A capacity was not even in my vocabulary when I was on the other side of the table. I didn't think about the fact that you need to have consultant per project or consultant team per account. there is a thing such as a good customer, the best customer. Obviously, that exists in software companies, and I've been through Marketo and outreach where sometimes we've seen taking on a dream customer might not have been the right thing to do. Sometimes in agency, such moves could be devastating. So we have to make sure we know our capacity, who we know we can serve, who we can make successful, and make sure we tell that to our partners as well, transparently. And I think it's just one more thing to add that that really hit me is the fact that we need to always allow our partners to know how we get paid, how our customers can become successful, how our joint initiatives can be really an advantage for our partners as well. And I know what I'm saying right now, especially for anybody in partnership roles, right? Duh, Alex, that's what we do. But actually, I have not had a conversation, a sincere, unfiltered conversation with my agency partners before who told me that. So if you are actually if you're an agency or working with agencies, just to make sure, go back and have that sometimes difficult conversation. But what is it really makes you as an agency tick? What can we do really to make this work? Apart from all of the programs that we think can make work. So those are a couple of things that really opened up the curtains for me as I stepped into this role.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that disconnect from, going from a technology company where you build a product once and then you distribute it to customers, but you iterate on the product, on the single product, and then that is able to be going out to lots of different customers, and the scale of that versus working in a services business where what you're building is something custom for every single customer. And so you have to be billing hours for that. Each of every single person, every single human that's in the business has to, to an extent, be billable hours, because the margin is very different when you have that kind of human intensive business versus something where it's like, hey, we basically built the product and we're going to
Right.
maintain it and improve it over time, but everything else is just sales and marketing and customer support. It's all kind of nice to haves on top, whereas the people are the product in a services business. And so
You nailed it.
yeah.
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit about this capacity planning process, because I think, yeah, I know almost nothing about it. You know much more now. I think most of the other people listening to this know almost nothing as well. And so yeah, tell us a little bit about what that process is, some of the things that you've learned. I think if I was to say oh, what is the pain point that a partnerships person at a technology company would encounter, where they're probably not empathizing with the capacity planning that a partner has to do, is hey, you said you want to do this thing. How come you haven't done my training? How come you haven't
Yeah.
done these? How come you haven't put time and effort into these things that you said you wanted to do? And I imagine the inverse of that, or the other side of the coin of that, is capacity planning. So I'm excited to have you talk a little bit about your learnings from that.
Yeah. So I love it. Let me take a step back for those who may not understand what capacity planning means in the first
Thank you.
place. And capacity planning, in the simplest term, is that you're right. Agency is the worst business to go in if you want to scale. Period. It is not a software, as cloud business is fantastic, right? This is why you see so many legacy companies go from on-prem to cloud, and this is why you're right. You build a product and you can scale. You can sometimes scale it while you sleep. It is not so with agencies, because capacity planning at its simplest form is how do you hire or how do you deploy your existing talent for your clients. And the beauty of being an agency is that, actually, unlike large companies or companies, it's like a motorcycle. You can actually open up the throttle and really expedite your hiring and get great talent in. Not everybody needs to stay on for full time. Some people leave after the project is done. Very common in our service environment. But you have to plan for that, or you may end up with an amazing customer, amazing opportunity, but not the right amount of folks to really make this project a success for your partner or for ultimately the client. Now, here at Outbound Funnel, we are 100% partner-led agency. That's maybe a story or paragraph to take on its own, but we've done a very, very, very good job on standardizing our process on implementing onboarding training or managing specific projects with our partners to the point where Outreach, Sales Loft, Gong is some of our software partners that we implement. If they throw over the fence, that's how seamless it became. If they throw over the fence a certain project, our SOW is standard. We know exactly the type of people that we need to put on, the introduction that happens between their account executive and our consultant, their client and our consultant, what that handoff becomes, where there's a quiet period, where it's just our agency working on the client. Our partners don't even have to worry about it. We got it. And then what kind of documentation and et cetera happens as we come to the end of a project and what that handoff happens between internal and external team. I'm saying all this with ease because it was a lot of work put in to say that with ease, trust me. Where I think most people experience with agencies, especially when you start a new program or you just onboard a new partner, is to understand what your agency partners got it down, nailed down, and know how to hire against very quickly. Or what are the projects that you need to really look ahead on, right? So I'll actually bring you sort of an example. We're working on a manufacturing company with a partner of ours. And I know from experience that certain accounts, it is best to have somebody in who really understand that particular vertical, who can speak to that client's language. And it's a niche. It may not be such a small niche. There's millions of people who work around that particular industry. But for us, it would be a niche hire or an advisor or contract who can come in. And so that plays a role on us saying yes. That plays a role on us saying when we can start the project. And it plays a role on the timelines, which a lot of times on a partner side, and when I say a partner side from us, that would be your software companies or any type of vendor. They just want to close the deal. They just want to make sure that sale is done before end of the quarter, or certain promises being made to the client. And I think we always have to come in with a little bit of a voice of reason to say we can make this happen, but we want to make sure we have the right people either already deployed and not busy with other projects, or we need to make sure we have the right support for our maybe say lead architects here to help with the client. So hopefully I can put a pretty big practice of ours in 2 minutes here, but that's in part what capacity planning means, is meaning having the right talent already ready to go and it's standardized and it's amazing flow. Now you just need to optimize it, or you have to have strategic projects and you can make sure you give both parties enough time to make sure you have the right people, right time, and most importantly, right time plan with your client involved. Don't leave them out of it to make that project ultimately a success.
Awesome. Yeah. And I have so many questions off the back of it. Like, honestly, I think we might spend all of our time here, to be honest. But
Happy to.
yeah. It's just so fascinating to me. And I think for people that are listening in as well. So I want to come back to the SOW stuff because that's like a gold mine. I can't wait. But first, you mentioned something about like having conversations with partners on how you get paid. And that kind of comes back to the services component of the nature of the business, right? And so I'm interested, like, ultimately, hey, like, I'm assuming, I don't want to project, but your goal for these partnerships is like these companies will send you customers, like, and you can do implementation work for them. And I can't wait to dig into like how you've optimized that process because it sounds really good. And then you also have like a limiting factor or like a constraint, which is like you can only take so many if you're wildly successful, you can only take so many leads because of capacity planning, right? Also, most of the people that you work with, I imagine, like on the tech side, want you to send them customers, right? Like, also, some of them, and I'm excited to dig into this, want you to do implementation services for them. I implemented Outreach before and worked with an implementation partner, so I had a good experience with that as well. But so, like, there is this dynamic, right, where it's like you want referrals from them. You can only take so many of them. You can only manage so many of them based on your scale. They want referrals from you. Their scale requires that they need a much higher volume of them than you can possibly manage, right? So either they have to have, either you have to scale up to be able to send them enough referrals to be meaningful, or they have to have loads of partners like you, which is not good for you because then you get less leads,
Yeah.
right? So, like, how does that dynamic work? Because like, I've been on the tech side, I've never been on the agency side.
Yeah. Oh my God. We are going to spend this entire call on this. We're obviously both part of partnership leaders that you co-founded, and I really enjoy being part of. And I think that is probably one of the topics. How do compensating our agency partners with 10% of a deal will make them more happy? Will they refer us more customers, new customers because of that? What's the balance between us giving them our customers and them giving us theirs? And gosh, I don't think there's a silver bullet. That's number one. From what my lessons were, and again, I was in that same camp, is that providing any type of financial reward, such as referrals, say 10% on bringing a new partner into us, to a software company from an agency, is not necessarily going to be the driver for an agency themselves to do that. And I knew that even before, but it really is even more so today when the clients that you earn as a firm are really tough earned clients. It takes a lot of effort to earn the trust and to become, and I would say that a lot of times, an extension of now our clients team to then bring in a vendor to really impact their business, their process, because now they do really trust us to essentially make certain decisions for on their behalf, and we have to be careful doing that. And I think that speaks to a lot of different partners. A lot of different partners also, unless they are super focused on one particular maybe segment or particular expertise. For example, you've seen, and I know a lot of owners of HubSpot agencies, right? They just focus on HubSpot. In reality, I actually envy them a little bit because all they have to just focus is execution of that HubSpot instance. They don't have anybody else to worry about. They only work with HubSpot and HubSpot teams, and that is the world. I've seen that happen also with Marketo and Oracle and certain agencies that have the expertise in our arena. And I think that happens also again with most other agencies because other agencies have other partners they work with, other firms that they need to think about. We walk on a very thin line, respecting sometimes our partners who are competitors against each other, to make sure that we do not blend those lines, and that most of the time when we interact with them is that we have a very solid strategic plan on how to address our specific client because they're already in there, because we're trying to both satisfy the needs to expand them or to make their processes work better. Um, one I think one other point that you mentioned about just making sure about the referral part going back and forth when a when a company is looking to really bring on board some of the agency partners. I truly believe that the biggest benefit of bringing anybody externally, whether it's SIs or specific consultants or whatever they may be, you bring in the agency partner. Um, I really don't see an agency being the biggest driver for your net new revenue, a biggest referral engine for your referral. Unless again you have, Monday.com. I was just looking at it another day. Fantastic way to scale their agency. That's a case study scenario, but there's very few in between like that. Um, for majority of times, I believe that you will be able to get the most out of your agency partners when you use them to drive customer success, not net new sales. But if you look at it from the perspective on how you can align them with customer success, whether it's right after sale and you just allow them to have a greater experience through a firm versus your internal teams for one or another reason, or you're approaching your existing customers, say, hey, we can do greater things, but we are at the end of the day a software company. We really only live in this dimension. you should work with our partner who can work outside of that box and really bring much broader expertise and capabilities, touch your data, integrate with things. We just cannot do that. That's where when you apply agency partners like us, I think the magic happens, where customer now feels like, number one, they're not alone in this fight. The software vendor partner should feel really good about it, because now they're becoming stickier and stickier proposition within their client tech stack, beyond just a tool, but now part of their go-to-market strategy and how their team's going to execute it using that tool. And obviously, as an agency, we're now just becoming part of that journey, right? Making sure that it actually happens and we follow through and we work with leaders to execute on their vision.
Yeah,
Hopefully, that kind of provided you that.
it does. It does. And I think, yeah, the where I've seen like amazing success with these types of partners, yeah, like you say, each relationship is really hard fought. It's like, so actually, if you send like one new customer to an agency, like for instance, when I was at Amplitude, most of our partners maybe had like 10 to 20 active customers at any one
Mm-hmm.
time, right? And
Yeah.
and and they'd get like a handful of new customers a year, let's say, right? And so, and like some would leave, some new ones would come in, but there wasn't like net growth, maybe like 3 5 net additional customers each year. Like it's not like crazy scale. And so like if you can send them like 1 or 2 customers a year, or even like more, that is amazing, right? Like that is high impact. Even if you give them like at bats with a couple of like where they're pitching against other partners, like having that, being able to do that is like really something. But because it's so hard to get those relationships or to win those customers otherwise, when you're just in competitive pitches with other agencies. And so yeah, like even if it's just a few referrals or a few deals, that can really make the difference. And like on the other side, yes, volume of referrals from agencies just didn't ever happen. But like what did happen, at least like with the partners that we prioritized, was like one of those like 4 referrals that you win a year from an agency partner would be like Walmart or Disney or
Yes,
Burger King or something
that's
like
right.
that.
That's right.
And that's where you have to like shift your lens. It's like, hey, enterprise companies work with agencies. And enterprise companies pay lots of money for stuff, so it's like, hey, you might not get 100 referrals a year from this agency, but you might get like 4, and one of them is Walmart, and they pay you like $500,000, and it's like, okay, well, that's probably worth like 10 to 20 customers for your average deal size. And if you can kind of be like, okay, I'm not going to get a high volume of referrals, and I might send them more referrals than I
Yeah.
get from them, but once in a while I'm going to get a really good enterprise one. And my experience, at least, and I don't want to project too much, like my experience at least was like, the partner was as happy with like a mid-sized referral from us as like an enterprise referral, because the work is quite standardized, as you mentioned already. And so like, hey, a more recognizable logo was cool, but it's like it could be like a startup with a recognizable logo, and that was still awesome for them. Whereas for us, like, so they were like, oh yeah, here's Walmart, and here's like Stitch Fix, and for us, we're like, Walmart, this is crazy, like amazing, we'd
Yeah.
never get in front of them, and to them it's like almost the same thing. And so I think that that's like a really good point that you make around like understanding that balance and understanding what the motivations are. And I would love to talk about the standardization a little bit, like your like the SOW, like outreach or whatever else, like, because I think there are partnership teams who, especially in this economic environment now where businesses are like, hey, we need to operate more efficiently. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we need to kind of reduce our workforce, unfortunately. And, like the reality is that software margins are negatively impacted by professional services organizations, right? And so if it's like, hey, if you can send that business to professional services companies, it's really great. But where everyone always gets stuck is like, hey, well, I'm going to send this to a partner, and then like I don't know whether they're going to be able to do like what we need them to do, like in the same way
Yes.
our professional services team does. Also, I don't know how to sell their services, you know. And so like tell me about your SOW, the standardization you've done, and how you've made that simple for these people to send you referrals.
Yeah. Okay. Now my turn to unpack this all.
Yeah,
Little fun fact: we actually, you mentioned certain agencies that you worked for in the past had about 10 to 20 clients, and I think that was my experience as well. Um, Actually, until I walked into Outbound Funnel, because for example, today, when we had to push our standing meeting till Tuesday because today is President's Day and we have a day off, but I believe last time I looked, we had over 60 clients running at the same time. Now, the reason for that was because we have amazing operators and amazing leaders who've been able to create a plan with their teams to say, again, there's certain process that we deal with certain type of customers, right? If they are certain size of business, if they're bought a certain type of solution, if they have a certain, and everybody got obviously their own objectives. We always want to capture those KPIs and share that with our partners, right? Whatever. Sometimes a lot of time clients they share with us things that the original seller, for example, from the software company did not capture, and so we just revealed some of that information to make sure that once we hand off that client back to them or the customer success team, they continue growing in the right direction. And so I'll split it into two, right? Because I think, and that's for any agency, if you are able to standardize your SKUs, if you have, for us, it's that implementation and managed services packages, we just got it down. I don't have to revisit it. It's SOW. I can ship it over to you like right now. Maybe change a couple of things just to make sure it is tailored because honestly, no SOW from agency comes completely untailored, but it's just a little bit. And you really want to understand as a partner to understand what are those standard SOWs, so that maybe you can actually fit your customers into that because there's no capacity planning there. You may really easily plug in your customers with agencies capabilities without much of a wait. So a lot of times, by the way, faster than your professional services teams. Um, Not necessarily cheaper, that depends, but most definitely as far as time to value, that the external parties typically win that conversation any given day when it's standardized. Now on the other spectrum, right, writing SOW for a client that came in with specific type of needs, right? I'll bring another story. We worked with a couple of marketing agencies back in On24, and that lesson I brought in here on Outbound Funnel, and that agency they really had a really good understanding on how Caterpillar have really grew their teams, how they were enabling, how they were working with their internal sales teams and also with their external clients. And so when they brought us to the table, when we were started working on all this, I didn't imagine, and now I understand, but that agency they had to create a completely new SOW to fit in the software partner to say what they are going to do within specific areas of business that they knew Caterpillar had kind of gaps in. And then also take in all of the things they already knew about Caterpillar and how they work and the language they used and division names that were very unique to them and plug those things into that contract to make it stick. That work, again, I'm describing in a few seconds. It's proper work because you have to be almost a detective, make sure you articulate that complete SOW package to the client that I have to say software vendors do not necessarily have to do. They ultimately have a product that you said is scalable, right? They're capable of doing certain tasks, certain automation capabilities, etc. But it does fall on that agency part to create that custom work that then they actually held responsible to execute. And to finish that thought process, because you did say, well, what happens? Do we know what's happening in that black box when agency all of a sudden takes over your client and you don't even know what's going on? It shouldn't be a black box, right? And by the way, here we always strive to be more transparent, to create better documentation between each other, and to follow through on making sure everybody understands where they are in their journey. But things happen, right? The customer all of a sudden loses somebody on their side, right? They laid off some folks. They had organizational change. impacts our timelines. All those things combined creates a bit of a challenge in creating those uh, service contracts. But again, the communication between the vendors, the agency, the ultimate client receiving those services, usually when done right, is close to magical. But really, all it comes down to is just details to what all parties agreed to do, and then who's responsible for what. Accountability is being set, and then documentation, documentation, documentation. So if you're working with your agency partners, make sure that you do get documentation of what they've done with their clients, and then vice versa. Make sure those documentations are being walked through with your internal teams, because a lot of times your internal teams would just get them and check box. Oh, it looks like they've done some good stuff. We'll meet with our customer 3 months before renewal. Don't do that because all the good work have just gone, out of the window. And as anybody knows, adoption and being sure you're close to your customer through the journey, not on the renewal date, but all the way through, is how you get that reoccurring customer who can become one of your strategic customers down the line.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. And so tell me, following off of that, like, so you're teleporting back to your time, say at Outreach, and the company, you know now that if you send agencies referrals, then you're likely to get a few referrals back, and hopefully those are like really meaningful customers, and you can kind of manage a good book of business that way. And also, customers are going to be more successful and retain at a higher rate if there's like a dedicated company that's going to work on their implementation and adoption of the product. So like we know all of that. That's basically like mostly a known fact. And so like how do you approach getting that SOW in place? And like because I feel like there's just so many variables that it becomes quite difficult to define. Okay, well, this is the minimum body of work
Mm-hmm.
that because ultimately you want to do two things, right? You want to make it easy for your sales team to sell, so that you can send those referrals to the partners. But like ideally, it's almost like it's a closed one deal for the partner already, and that was my experience with Outreach. And then the other part of it is like you want the success or professional services team to be comfortable that like the right stuff is going to get done. And so like how do you approach that, and like how should other people approach that if they want to be able to get a standard SOW statement of work? By the way, I don't know if we defined that already. Standard SOW in place that your sales team can sell, that your partners can implement, so that you can send them more referrals. Like, how do you do it?
Enablement. I know that one is actually a silver boat. Is that you just need to make sure that you really educate your partners as much as possible across all teams of what's possible. That one is definitely, and I need to drink my own champagne here. It needs to be done as often as possible. The standard SOW is something that you just, as an agency, you have to create, right? And you have to stand behind, and you have to know that your teams are ready to receive that new work once the sale is done. And there's no question asked. It's just we already agreed that a certain amount of hours are going to go against certain kind of customer, maybe different industry, maybe different requirements, but it's 80% there. I think maybe what you're looking also to kind of like uncover and wheel, right, is okay, but what happens if that standard SOW is not so standard? I think that's what happens most of the time, and in reality, it just takes it is on the agency side where we have to make sure we stand by the time and the hours and materials and deliverables that we promised, but also if we are going above, and if we have done anything quicker than the work requires, we should not be held against it. I ultimately want that time to value. You don't want us to stick around. If we're hitting our exact timeline, either the project was it required that much, or I don't know, maybe something went wrong. I perceive the win is to be an executable SW before the timeline hit. On the other spectrum, if you're now beyond the timeline and we're now dragging the project and everybody's questioning each other of what's going on, would have been better to be internal team? Is this the right customer? All the questions pop up. What I've seen, and again, this is now my experience here at the agency side, because I didn't see any of that when I was back in on 24 outreach, Paolo. In the agency world, we have to, just like we talk about capacity planning, we have to look at a project plan and the timeline. That calendar, it becomes Bible, because you have to make sure not only your team, but also respectively a client is responsible for doing what you're prescribing them to do. And so whenever we talk about SOWs going outside of that range, we have to make sure that we keep each other accountable. And a lot of times it's on the client's timeline and the client's side, we miss the mark and we have to extend it. Sometimes it costs money, sometimes it costs additional time to do it. But that accountability on the timeline is one of the things that I think a lot of people need to understand, that agencies need to abide by. And if you understand that, then you can also keep your customers checking. You can also keep your team's expectations in check to work well with them. I think that's probably the biggest point. If you did say, go back to the outreach times, and I had a pleasure, and I still have a pleasure working with the range of their go-to-market teams, and I've seen their partnership program take over shape and times and turns since I left. But I think that's another great example. Partnerships always have to evolve as well. The agency partnerships that I've had, whenever it was now 5, 6 years ago, are not necessarily applicable today, right? They have to change. They have to adapt to environment. You have to understand where they are meaningful and where it may actually put more weight on your team, and it does not make sense in there, because and this is one important part as a seller. I can tell you right now, working with partners, you are going to break your number one rule that every sales leader will have ever been into your head. As a salesperson, number one job that you can do is to control your sales process, control your sales cycle. When you introduce a partner into that equation, by definition, you're introducing a variable that you may not be able to control. Now, in our world, we bring benefit to that. You're actually bringing a lot of value with that. Customer side, especially if you work with larger customers, look, you're no longer one. Now you have an army of people who are here to help you, Mr. Customer. It feels good on the customer side, actually, to see that you're not alone trying to make their project a success. But you have to make sure that the sellers understand that process that they want to control, they have to share with their partner. And when they do, again, close to magical things happen, because we become together on the same journey to make our joint customer, mutual customer, happy. Simple as that. When one or another party tries to take too much control of the situation, I think is when you start seeing those black boxes, or just bad process, right? It's just easier just to close your eyes and say, well, I threw it over the fence. They did what they did, and then I came back. And so again, that continuous collaboration, share of documentation, share of goals, share of change of goals, so change of timelines between partner and seller, partner and agencies, etc. However you want to say it, around the client is the key. And again, I kind of went around the world here about your question about SOWs, but that really is the formula of creating a good SOW. Is that timeline that all parties, from the vendor to agency to client, are responsible to execute in a certain amount of timeline. We have the right people, the capacity planning, client got the POCs, the vendor has their product working over time. And with that in mind, we have a workable SOW that can be then signed and executed against. You have that, you have an amazing experience across all, and then you have to adapt as you go on.
Amazing, amazing. Well, for those who are listening, we will have edited, and you won't know that my house alarm went off. But we had to cut this a little bit short because the house alarm went off. And so, Alex, I would love to have you back, because I think that there's a lot that we could go deeper into the agency model even further, but I think that I would love to spend some time talking about like the tech partnership side. And if you were to go back now, like what would be some of the things that you did differently. So if you're willing to do that, I would love to do that. But for today, thank you so much for the time. I know that this is going to be extremely valuable. I tried to do this standard SOW stuff twice, optimize the amplitude, and like failed both times, and so like that's why I'm so fascinated in this, and I know that other people will as well. So thank you so much for the time. I extremely appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ty. Happy to join back anytime.